Democrats walking away from the negotiating table as both sides remain far, far apart. The White House indicating the shutdown is likely to go on for quite some time. Peter Doocy live on Capitol Hill, where it seems very quiet up there. I see some tourists behind you, Peter, but is there any hope in sight that this stalemate is going to come to an end?
No, not really, Ed. The only thing still sitting out there is the $5 billion in border wall money that passed the House and then got stuck in the Senate. So now there are some Republicans in the House who want Senate leaders to take another look at that.
My feeling is this is so important. This is an emergency. This is our southern border. This is the defense of our nation. The 60-vote rule, the filibuster rule in the Senate should be suspended to allow this appropriations bill to go forward and send it to the president and give him the money he needs. Let's get the government back open again, but let's also protect our southern border. Because
so he wants to change the rule so that something could pass the Senate with 51 votes instead of 60 votes. The problem is Mitch McConnell is very protective of Senate precedents, and Mitch McConnell isn't even here today. I just walked by his office on my way to the camera, and there's a big stack of newspapers still piled up outside the door.
Yeah, and not a lot of people working there on the Hill right now. Peter, what is the sense from the Democratic side of all of this? They had said in some iterations of this, Chuck Schumer, that the president's not going to get any money for the wall. Is there somewhere in between $0 and $5 billion here?
Still $0 for the Democrats, and the White House says that they slashed their offer. We know that they did want $5 billion for the border wall. They offered $2.5 billion, but Democrats said they didn't want that. They did not make a counteroffer, and then they left town. But some of the Democratic members are now talking about President Trump like he's got other problems.
I think it's an embarrassment any time the government shuts down, and this being no exception. But we ought to work at it until we get to an agreement where a majority say yes. And I think we had that until the president, went off his meds, and who the hell knows what happened.
Again, there are barely any lawmakers here today, so Paul Ryan's tenure as Speaker appears poised to end shut down. Ed.
Wow. Peter Doocy reporting live from the Hill. Let's get back to that Fox News alert. While there's a stalemate going on the Hill, there's a massive manhunt in California that may finally be coming to an end. Authorities there are saying they have arrested a suspected cop killer who they believe was living in this country illegally. The suspect, whose name has not yet been released, is accused of shooting and killing Officer Ronald Singh during a traffic stop early Wednesday morning in Newman, California, about 100 miles southeast of San Francisco. Out in California is where we find William LaJeunesse. He's live in our West Coast Bureau with more. William, what are the breaking details at this hour?
Well, recall that police vowed yesterday the suspect would be caught and brought to justice. Now, after 36 hours, I am told by a reliable law enforcement source, a suspect is in custody. Also, the Sacramento Bee reporting that police made an arrest in Bakersfield this morning, about 200 miles south of Newman in the Central Valley. That is where Officer Ron Singh was killed. Singh joined the department 11 years ago. He was one of only 13 officers. He emigrated here legally from Fiji and took extra English lessons to make himself better understood on the police radio. Now, hours before the shooting on Christmas Day, he took this photo with his wife and their 5-month-old son.
His 5-month-old, he will never hear talk. He will never see his son walk. He doesn't get to hold that little boy, hug his wife, say goodnight anymore because a coward took his life.
So we don't know much about the suspect because, as you said, police released the photo, but not his name. But they did say he is an illegal immigrant who lived in a Newman area trailer park. And early today, police actually searched a farmhouse nearby, maybe where he worked. Security cameras show him buying beer at a convenience store shortly before the shooting, wearing a black jacket and silver chain, black shoes. And then moments later, Officer Singh stopped that suspect in his pickup truck with no plates and on a suspected DUI. Minutes later, Singh radios in, shots fired, I've been hit. He later died. Now, pressers are scheduled at noon local time, one in Newman, where the officer was shot. And Ed, we're also saying or learning that a second Press conference is scheduled in Bakersfield, where the suspect was allegedly captured. That about an hour later. Back to you.
All right, William, we'll get back to you with any breaking details, and as you teed it up, we'll go live to those news conferences as well. The president, meanwhile, using the accused cop killer's immigration status to argue again for the wall on our southern border. He threatened to cut off aid to 3 Central American countries whose citizens reportedly make up the migrant caravan that has been near the southern border. For more on this, let's bring in Tom Bevan, of course, co-founder and publisher of Real Clear Politics. Good to see you, Tom.
Great to be with you, Ed.
So we usually talk about politics with you, and we'll get into that, but it's hard to get past first the tragedy of this. As this political drama, we were talking with Peter Doocy about it. It's a stalemate still on Capitol Hill, but there are real lives being impacted here. There's a police officer who left behind a wife and a 5-month-old son. The picture we see so haunting there around Christmas, the last time his widow saw him. Talk a little bit about how that happening in the middle of this political debate, how all of this may play out.
Well, I mean, obviously it is a tragedy, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the family. And it does, as Mick Mulvaney pointed out on Fox earlier, the twist of this story is that it highlights the legal immigration and why that's such a great thing. This officer was from Fiji. He immigrated legally. He was pursuing his dream of being a cop, and then to be gunned down by someone who was in the country illegally. So that adds a twist to this tragedy. And meanwhile, we've got the government shutdown over the funding for the border wall. And the incentives, while I think that will affect the shutdown on the margins, it doesn't change the fundamental dynamics of what the shutdown is. And you've got Democrats on one side, Nancy Pelosi really trying to show that she was Democrats were right to pick her as speaker. She wants to stand up to Trump. And then you've got Trump, who's drawn a line in the sand, a red line, on this issue of getting the money needed to do the border wall. And there's no incentive for compromise, and it looks like it's going to continue.
You mentioned the president. Let's get to that shutdown politics. Among his tweets today, I teed this up a moment ago. He said at one point today, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador are doing nothing for the United States but taking our money. We will be cutting off all aid to these 3 countries, taking advantage of the U.S. for years. Tom, as you know, he went on to tweet that he may just completely shut down the southern border to the United States if Congress doesn't give him this money. And then you mentioned Mick Mulvaney, the incoming acting chief of staff at the White House. He seemed to be trying to split the Democrats by saying, to your point about Pelosi trying to shore things up as the incoming speaker, that she doesn't want to deal with the White House, but that maybe Schumer, Chuck Schumer, does want to get a deal. Talk about the politics going on there.
Well, there is some, and you played this clip earlier, there's this idea that maybe there could be some compromise in the Senate. The filibuster in the Senate is not going to be suspended or done away with just for this piece of legislation. There are too many Republicans who don't want that to happen. But and Nancy Pelosi has not negotiated at all. She is not interested in giving Trump a penny more. So it's hard to see how you can get something from the House to the Senate when Democrats now take control of Congress that could be a compromise, unless there's some way that they can work this out. Trump has also been saying, look, it doesn't have to be a wall, a big, beautiful wall. Sure. It could be, a barrier, some kind of fence, whatever. So he's doing his best to work his way out of the corner that he sort of painted himself in. But quite frankly, the Democrats think they have the upper hand on this politically, and they're going to ride this until the pressure is such that it causes one side or the other to buckle. We don't know who that's going to be or how that's going to play out, but Tom, it will happen in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I hear you. Last question. It does certainly seem like the Democrats have had the upper hand because they're waiting to take power in the House, as you say. On the other hand, I noticed the Washington Post editorial board comes out today, and I'll just briefly summarize, not give you the whole thing, but they said basically, why don't you give, and you see it there, Democrats should let him have funding for the wall in return for a permanent fix to the immigration status of the Dreamers, people brought to this country as children without authorization. And then Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez went on and he told NBC News, look, give the president some kind of ransom. Let's move on. Let's get a ransom, I should say. Let's get something from him, whether it's stock or something else, to give him the wall. That made me wonder, does the president have more leverage here than we're all assuming if Democrats like Gutierrez, editorial pages like the Washington Post are saying, you know what, guys, give him something and then let's move on?
Well, that's certainly what Republicans and Trump, that's the game that he's playing. He's trying to turn this on Democrats because right now he's receiving the blame for the shutdown. And what he wants to do is turn this around and say, listen, I'm negotiating in good faith, but they're not negotiating back with me. They've taken their ball and gone home. And that could turn the public perception of this, the public debate around it, especially if he does go a step further and offer that sort of, wall for dreamer deal that was on the table before. And if he puts it out there again, if Democrats don't take that, that might shift the dynamic.
There might be finally a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Tom Bevan, we appreciate you breaking it all down for us today.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, some nasty weather, meanwhile, hitting the south all the way up to the northeast, bringing some severe flooding around this holiday season. How long will it last, and what's the forecast for New Year's Eve? Plus, Rudy Giuliani weighing in again on what President Trump will or will not answer in Robert Mueller's Russia probe. We'll talk to Ken Starr, the independent counsel during the Clinton presidency, and get the latest on what's really happening with this investigation.
Fox News Headlines 24/7, Channel 115.
Two powerful storms moving across America today, bringing snow and blizzard-like conditions to the upper Midwest as well as the Southwest, as extreme flash flooding hits states like Mississippi after heavy rains downed some trees and forced some water rescues. Our chief meteorologist, Rick Rackmuth, is here with what to expect this weekend. Good to see you, Rick.
Hey, yeah, you too. You know, things are going to get a little bit better this weekend, but we got to get through today, and there's still a lot of rough weather going on, including a big cool down here behind the storm. We had all that snow across the central part of the country. Eastern part of the country has warmed up a lot today. Enjoy at least the temperatures today, where we've got temps into the 50s and 60s, and a big cool down right across the central part of the country. That's behind the storm. It's also causing some big travel delays. The big airports right around the New York City area, Philadelphia as well. Major delays going on because of all of that rain. You can see this. It's a really slow-moving storm. It's what caused all the flooding overnight last night around Louisiana at 11 inches of rain. This slow mover here is because it's moving so slow. That's why we're watching the rainfall totals pile up. It's also been a really wet December and a really wet year. A lot of areas on the eastern seaboard are dealing with the wettest year you've ever had. Atlanta, right now, you're at your second wettest year. Probably by the time we get through the weekend, we might be pushing the wettest year ever. Across the Northeast, heavy rain still here. This will eventually move out of here. Here's the future radar. By about tonight, most of this is gone, and then we go into kind of a better pattern for much of the weekend, except across the southeast. We're going to continue to keep things pretty gloomy right there. We're also going to watch for that cold air. You see it right there. Don't worry, it doesn't stick around that long. Most of that cold air goes back to Canada, where we like it, by tomorrow. Ed?
You know, Rick, when you started off saying we need to get through the day, I was assuming you were talking about the weather and not yourself, because I can hear your voice. You're still fighting the cold.
I am fighting a cold. However, I am so much better. I have been
It's
in bed
that point where
Sunday.
you sound worse than you actually feel.
I feel a lot better than I have, at least, and I can kind of talk now, although it's probably not fun to listen to.
No, it's fine, and we appreciate your reporting as always. And I wonder what's the prognosis, not just for you, but for everyone's weather on New Year's Eve.
It's going to be wet, and you know, some years you worry about that cold. We had that last year. This year, it's probably going to be raining around New Year's Eve. Temps into the mid-40s, which is not fun if you're standing outside.
I did that last year, and it was zero.
It was zero, which is going. But you'd rather have snow, because at least snow doesn't make you sopping wet. Rain, nothing going. You're just going to be wet.
There'll be people waiting out there for hours anyway.
I don't understand it.
All right.
At least if you're working it, you have
you have to.
You have to do it, and you're getting paid for it. But to do that voluntarily, no way.
It's great fun. I hope you're feeling better. Good to hear that, and hope to see you over the weekend.
Yep, will do.
All right. Michael Cohen, meanwhile, firing back at a new report that appears to back up some claims about him in the anti-Trump Steele dossier. One of several new developments related to the Mueller probe. Those details next. And the markets closing shortly after another wild week on Wall Street. How are we looking? How's your wallet going to do as we head into the new year? We'll have details coming up. Giuliani saying that's no longer an option.
He is not answering any more questions from these people. Their outrageous activity. We did enough. We did everything. We gave them 1.4 million documents. We've not raised privilege for 38 witnesses. They've gone on from what they started with to investigating cases that end up with 14-day jail sentences for Papadopoulos. They're seeking no time for General Flynn.
Well, Ken Starr is a former independent counsel, of course, the author of the book Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation. Judge Starr, thanks for coming in today.
Hey, my pleasure, Ed.
Now, as everyone knows, that independent counsel probe of Bill Clinton, you were accused as well of starting to investigate one thing, and all of a sudden it morphs into something else. You had to battle the same kind of allegations. How does Robert Mueller handle that as he tries to finish this report, we expect finally, in the new year? But also, what's really going on with Rudy Giuliani and what he's saying?
Right. Well, it's for Bob Mueller, it's steady as she goes. You get the job done. You try to do it as efficiently as you can, and you try to ignore the name calling. As for Rudy, I love Rudy. He's a go-getter, a real fighter as a lawyer, and I think a terrific person. But he's not going to have the last word in this. He's sort of laid down the gauntlet. That's it. And so we will obviously see what Bob Mueller decides to do. It may be that Bob Mueller has said, that's not it. And Mr. President, we do need more information. I'm speculating.
Sure.
But what we would not want, for the sake of the country, frankly, and for the presidency to carry on in an orderly way, is to see some big battle over the issue as to whether is the president going to appear before a grand jury.
Yeah.
We had that during the Clinton years. Hopefully we'll avoid that.
Quickly, a couple other things. He made some headlines by saying, look, it's not a crime to knowingly receive stolen property, as in this case, potentially hacked emails. Some critics wondering, is he laying the groundwork for the idea that they did receive stolen emails, and they're trying to say, look, it was no big deal. But then also, he raised an important point about Bob Mueller and his investigation. What happened to some of Peter Strzok's text messages from 2017? And Giuliani is saying it's time for Mueller to be investigated as to whether he's been hiding evidence.
Well, I think we're in a rhetorical battle right now with Rudy essentially on the offensive, and it's good when you're a criminal defense lawyer to be in that posture. But I think some of those issues are actually being examined by the Inspector General in the Justice Department, and I think it's fair comment. I think the American people want to know exactly what happened. How did this entire investigation begin? The House Intelligence Committee took a whack at it and so forth, but I think we're going to hear more from inside the Justice Department, quietly doing its job to try to get to the bottom of these very important issues.
Now, Judge Starr, you may not be able to see it on the screen right now. We have some facts about the case, including Michael Cohen, the president's former attorney. I teased that a moment ago. McClatchy has a story out there that others have not matched yet, so it's unclear whether it's real, saying allegedly that a cell phone signal was captured, putting Michael Cohen in the area of Prague back in the summer of 2016 in the heat of the campaign. He's repeatedly denied ever being around there, and in fact has now tweeted in reaction to this story. He hasn't tweeted a lot lately because of his own situation. He said, I hear Prague, the Czech Republic, is beautiful in the summertime. I wouldn't know as I have never been. Mueller, he tweets, knows everything. What do you say to that?
Well, I would go with what Michael is now saying. I cannot imagine, strange things happen in this world, that he would be saying one thing to Bob Mueller, I was in Prague, but then denying it in a tweet. That kind of misinformation campaign at this stage makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So I would go with the denial, but these interesting facts that the McClatchy reporters have pulled together obviously deserve further inquiry.
Yeah, some are saying it's third-hand information and it's unclear whether it's true. We'll be investigating the days ahead. I've got 1 minute left. I want to ask you about one of your friends, Bill Barr, who of course served as Attorney General in the Bush 41 administration. You could talk about him generally, but specifically I want to get at what you talked about a moment ago, which is people in our audience are frustrated that there hasn't been accountability for some of that FBI misconduct, the text messages, the other things we talked about. And Huber out in Utah, that prosecutor was named the U.S. attorney to get to the bottom of it. Nobody seems to have heard from him in months. Is Bill Barr somebody who can come in and finally get to the bottom of some of that stuff?
Well, I think more may be underway than we know. And in fact, I'm sure that that's the case. But yes, I have great confidence, Ed, in Bill Barr. I served alongside him, and then I served under him, under President Bush 41. He was a very effective Attorney General. He's extremely smart. He's aggressive in the best sense of the word, with integrity. He will get to the bottom of things. I think we should feel very good about this nomination.
Well, the president has a lot of nominees will be pending now, a new defense secretary in the new year as well. We'll be watching all of that. We appreciate you coming in, Judge Starr. Good luck with the book. Remember, pick up a copy of that new book, Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation. Judge Starr, thanks for coming in. All right, the president, meanwhile, tweeting new threats today as the partial government shutdown drags on. We're live at the White House with some details. And the Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, is at our southern border today, just days after a second migrant child died in U.S. custody. Will that move the series live in Atlanta with more? Jonathan, what caused the problem?
Hi, Ed. Well, today the FCC announced that it's launched an investigation into what caused the outage at CenturyLink, which the agency says knocked out 911 service to numerous consumers across the country. The FCC chairman issued a statement earlier today saying when an emergency strikes, it's critical that Americans are able to use 911 to reach those who can help. The CenturyLink service outage is therefore completely unacceptable, and its breadth and duration are particularly troubling. The FCC investigation will also be looking at why the CenturyLink outage appears to have affected some other providers. There are reports that some Verizon customers were also impacted by this outage. Yesterday, CenturyLink announced that its engineers had discovered a, quote, network element at the root of the problem and that they hope to have it resolved within a matter of hours. But midday today, the company tweeted, restoring impacted services for our customers is very important to us. We are seeing good progress, but our service restoration work is not complete. Our teams are continuing their efforts to resolve these issues, and we will continue to provide updates throughout the day. Ed?
Well, Jonathan, in the meantime, we've got viewers who are wondering they've got a relative in an affected area, or they may be in the affected area. What do you do if you have an emergency?
Yeah, first you want to try to make a voice call to 911, but if that doesn't work, in some areas you're able to text your emergency to 911, but before you do that, make sure that the text to 911 feature is available in your area. It's not uniform across the country. If it's unavailable, emergency officials say it's important to jot down the 7-digit or 10-digit local numbers to your local police department, your fire department, and other emergency responders so that when 911 is not available, you can dial these services directly, Ed.
All right, important information. Jonathan, appreciate you coming in.
Certainly.
The White House, meanwhile, blasting Democrats on day 7 of that partial government shutdown as the president issues a new ultimatum. Either build the wall or he'll close the southern border altogether. Meanwhile, the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is heading to the border in El Paso, Texas, after this week's death of a second migrant child who was in U.S. custody. Our correspondent Ellison Barber live at the White House with the details. Good to see you, Ellison.
Good to see you, Ed. Yeah, Secretary Nielsen is expected to spend today and tomorrow at the southern border to see firsthand medical screenings and also conditions at Border Patrol Station. She announced this trip shortly after Customs and Border Protection announced that an 8-year-old died in their custody. A preliminary autopsy by the New Mexico Office of the Medical Examiner indicates that the child had the flu, but they are still evaluating and interpreting their findings. Nielsen says she ordered a thorough medical screening on all children in custody of Border Patrol and said that moving forward, all children will receive a more thorough hands-on assessment at the earliest possible time post-apprehension, whether or not the accompanying adult has asked for one. And that is a direct quote from her there. Nielsen says that she's asked Mexico to investigate the causes of these illnesses and provide medical assistance in shelters as needed. Meanwhile, President Trump is threatening to shut down the southern border unless he has funding for a wall. His budget director, Mick Mulvaney, also his incoming chief of staff, told reporters this morning that it is the only way they can get the Democrats' attention and that all options are on the table. The White House says that discussions have broken down at this point, and they're placing a whole lot of the blame on House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi.
You'll have to ask Nancy Pelosi. Right now, what we've seen from her is that she's unwilling to actually do anything until she gets her speakership. She's more willing to protect that than she is to protect our borders and protect American lives, and we hope that we'll see that change over the next couple of days.
A spokesperson for Pelosi says that Democrats have offered Republicans 3 options to reopen government that all include funding for strong, sensible, and effective border security, but not the president's immoral, ineffective, and expensive wall. Ed.
All right, Ellison, thank you for that. For more on this, Lauren Claffey is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the Homeland Security Department and the founder of Claffey Communications. Greg Speed is the president of America Votes, a progressive group that supports Democrats. Good to see you both today.
Great to be here.
Good to see you, Ed.
Lauren, I want to start with you since you used to work for Secretary Nielsen and she's headed to the border, as we noted today. Where do we stand in all these negotiations?
I think where we were last night, right? I mean, nothing's really changed. And the Democrats just don't have an incentive at this point to negotiate with the president. And, Pelosi's just going to wait until she has control of the House. That makes the current funding bill completely invalid. They go renegotiate. And, as much as the president and the White House are right to try to blame Nancy Pelosi for this, they haven't really brought anything to the table either to force her hand. So until there is some sort of real crisis, and be that, you know, through the federal employees that have been furloughed or receiving back pays, having financial hardships to a degree where they're not making their credit card payments or their mortgage payments or such, there's not going to be anything to really force their hands and bring everybody to the table, which is a complete atrocity that we're even having this conversation and that the government is not funded and functioning.
Greg, on that point, let's listen to the incoming White House acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney on Fox earlier.
A couple other things I want to point out with my OMB hat on. Then a lot of folks reported that people are working without pay. Okay, not true. Paychecks actually go out today. We're in the middle of a government shutdown, and the ordinary pay cycle would pay folks today, and those paychecks are going out. It's the next payroll that's impacted will be January 11th.
Greg, we don't want to minimize anybody who's concerned and they work in the federal government that a paycheck may not come later this month. That's a serious issue, and we can't deny that. However, in previous shutdowns, we saw, you know, people going to the national monuments and they couldn't get in, all kinds of media stories that put pressure on one party or the other. It seems like in this one, the president's push for the border wall money, he's not facing that much public pressure right now. Or do you see it otherwise?
Well, I see it otherwise, Ed. Thanks. First of all, I would say to Mick Mulvaney, he may be wearing an OMB hat, but he doesn't know some important parts of federal compensation, specifically that those working for the Coast Guard, 42,000 uniformed and civilian employees, are already missing their paychecks because they are on a different pay schedule than the rest of the federal government. So you talk about Lauren had said, you know, and we start to see atrocities, we are going to see that very soon. And in fact, it has already begun for 42,000 folks in uniform and otherwise working for the Coast Guard. So I think the pressure is going to get ratcheted up in a big, big way in the coming days, and all the fingers are being pointed at President Trump in terms of who is to blame for this shutdown.
Lauren, maybe
I have never seen polling this decisive.
Sure.
We've had several shutdowns. The American people know squarely where to place blame this time.
Lauren, on this question of what do people do if they start missing paychecks, the Office of Personnel Management, the federal government, put out a tweet saying, hey, here's a sample letter to send out to your creditors. It's raised some eyebrows online. Among other things, they say, here's a letter if you're a furloughed government worker, send to your creditors. My income has been severely cut, and I'm unable to pay the entire cost of my rent along with my other expenses. I'll keep in touch with you to keep you informed about my income status, and I would like to discuss with you the possibility of trading my services to perform maintenance, painting, carpentry work in exchange for partial rent payments. In the real world, is that going to really work for a federal worker?
I mean, I don't understand how some of these people who have been deemed essential, and especially national law enforcement or national security officials, are going to be able to work their full-time job because they're official, but they aren't receiving pay. So then they're going to paint houses on the weekend to cover rent or whatever else. I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it's important to note that these are form letters that the government wrote in 2013 when we first started having government shutdowns, and the fact that this is now our third government shutdown in 2018 is just, I mean, mind-boggling that this has become the new norm. But it is at least something that creditors are aware of. They see it on the news. They're going to hopefully be charitable and forgiving during this time period, because at least historically these employees have received back pay from Congress, and Congress has indicated that they're going to do that as well. So at least they won't miss payments. They'll just be delayed on them, and I hope that every creditor takes that into account.
Greg, you talked about the pressure a moment ago that may be on the president with some of the public polling. On the other hand, we mentioned earlier Democrat Luis Gutierrez, a longtime congressman from Illinois, as you know, said, look, we should get something as Democrats in exchange for the border wall money. And then on top of that, the Washington Post editorial page, which last I checked is no fan of President Trump. You and I both know that. They're saying, look, let's end this shutdown by getting the Democrats DACA or something they've long wanted in exchange for the president's $5 billion. So isn't there pressure now on the Democrats? You talked about the president, but why won't the Democrats come to the table and say, okay, we want something, we'll give you the wall money?
Well, a few things here. First, the Republicans still control Congress until January 3rd. So a lot of this being directed at Democrats and Leader Pelosi, but the reality is The Republicans still control the Congress. And until that day comes and Speaker Pelosi moves into
hang on,
office.
Greg. I'm going to let you finish your point, but nobody's working right now. We've already shown that at the top of the show with Peter Doocy. Neither party, everyone gets the blame. But here's my real question: Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer could pick up the phone to the president right now. He's been saying, "Look, I want this money," and they could say, "Okay, you're going to get that money, or you're going to get $3 billion. But here's what we want." My question really is, why won't the Democrats negotiate with the president?
Well, to listen to Leader Pelosi's office, they have put some proposals on the tables, the specifics of which we don't know. That being said, I think in the end, look, there will be some sort of deal. Trump, according to all the Democratic leaders, will not get his wall. What that deal looks like, we don't know. The one thing we know with certainty is the wall it will not be part of that package for all the reasons that were mentioned previously, as well as the fact that President Trump had said Mexico is going to pay for this wall. And here we are in a protracted stalemate.
Let's give Lauren the last
where
point.
none of that is part of the discussion.
Lauren,
I just want to point out that I don't think that President Trump squarely owns the shutdown yet. I don't know what polls that you're referencing, but every polling I've seen is within 10 points, where 33% are blaming the Democrats, and then maybe 40% are blaming President Trump. So I think it's kind of up in the air right now who's going to take full credit for this. I think most people are just going to end up disgusted that this happened.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. Lauren, Greg, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, something turned the New York City sky. Did you see this? It was amazing. It turned it into an eerie blue last night, like a scene out of the movie Independence Day. So what in the world was going on? Speaking of the Big Apple, it's almost party time in Times Square. Guess what? Carly Shimkus and Griff Jenkins will be to be a transformer explosion at a power plant, and not the space invasion that some people were worried about. Watch.
It was freaky. It was like Independence Day in the movie, where you just look up and a weird blue color that you haven't seen lighting up the clouds in the sky.
Well, something freaky happens. We turn, of course, to Griff Jenkins, a Fox News correspondent, and Carly Shimkus, a reporter for Fox News Headlines 24/7. Great to see you.
Good to see
You said that you didn't see it yourself with your own eyes, Carly, but it, it's lighting up social media. You're getting text messages from friends. It was wild.
Yeah, I have a girlfriend who lives in that area, and she sent me the video of it. It's important to note that happened at around 9:30 at night, so it was totally pitch black. It looked clear as day outside, and the NYPD tweeted this. They said no injuries, no fire, no evidence of extraterrestrial activity, which I think is a good thing, because if there was ever an alien invasion, I would imagine it would look something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was wild. What about you, Griff? You were here in New York City.
I was asleep because I was getting ready to anchor Fox and Friends, which you're going to do tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow.
I know what it's like. I sleep through all kinds of things.
Yeah, so here's what happened. I called Con Ed today, talked to the spokesman, Michael Clendon, okay? And he gave us an official statement so you can put this up on the screen of what exactly happened. They say last night at 9:12 p.m. an electrical fault on a section of 138,000 volt equipment in one of our Astoria substations caused a transmission disturbance in a sustained electrical arc flash, creating the blue light people witnessed. We apologize for the disruption to customers and will continue to investigate the root cause of the incident. I asked Mike, I said, so why blue? And he told me, he says it could be the aluminum that's on the electrical equipment. It did close LaGuardia for a short time, and there were some outages, but at the end of the day, no one seriously injured, fortunately, and no shutdown.
So serious situation, then it calmed down. People have some fun. You mentioned Fox and Friends Weekend. We do together sometimes, Griff. Adam Klotz, our meteorologist, he's with us on the weekend sometimes. He had a little fun, among other people. You saw this on social media. He said, the picture the government doesn't want you to see, with this alien looming over all of us.
I truly hope that was photoshopped.
Yeah, I think it was. So we can also.
By the way, no comment from Will Smith whether or not we're going to be
Absolutely. Now, look, this is the end of the year, beginning of a new one. You kind of take stock of what happened the last year. I've been trying to do that myself. I thought it started out really well. Last New Year's Eve, I was asked by management to be one of the big hosts on New Year's Eve. You can see a picture. I looked really, really happy.
Yeah.
I was there with Lisa Marie Booth and Dean Cain. And then in the middle of the year, something happened that I think changed it. I was on with Tucker, and I was on with Carly, and we competed in the news quiz, and you were the champ, and I beat you.
You did.
And you were mad at me.
I'm so glad we're bringing up this old memory again.
And I feel like we have a beef, so I'm going to air this now, because then over the Christmas holiday, I start getting text messages the weekend before Christmas.
Oh, no.
Carly's on with Jesse Waters airing this beef, and she said this.
most likely to get a lump of coal?
I'm going with Ed Henry. This was a no-brainer.
Why is that a no-brainer?
There's a reason, because I was on a roll on Tucker Carlson's quiz show over the summer.
I gotcha.
Ed Henry was the guy to beat me. A woman never forgets those things.
Oh, you're going to hold a grudge.
So out of everybody in the building, Ed Henry's getting the lump of coal.
So I'll get a little bit cold, and then I come to work today and find out you're not doing New Year's Eve. It's Carly, coincidence, and Griff Jenkins. Were you guys conspiring?
Don't bring me into this.
I totally bring you in.
Ultimate payback. I spoke to management and I said, I need to take something away from Ed.
Take Ed out.
I was really hoping you didn't see that. But the part
I
that...
didn't, but people were literally texting me saying, did you see what Carly did? She
It was
just
on
blew me
national
up.
television. But I did say, oh, I love you. That part wasn't aired. Just that. I love you. You're a great guy. I had to give the lump of coal to somebody. Certainly not going to be Griff Jenkins.
So in all seriousness, I am going to be filling in for Brett Baer this year. I'm really happy you're both doing it. Tell me what you're going to have on the show.
We're going to have a great show. By the way, she didn't at least cause a blue light explosion, on your
So it could have been
home or
worse.
something. So, I mean, it could have been a lot
Not
worse.
yet.
But Carly and I are going to be there from 8 to 10 p.m. in Times Square. And then afterwards, when you have Pete and Kennedy and others take over.
Pete, never heard of him.
From 10 to 1 a.m.
Pete Hank says we spend the weekends a lot.
There we are. In fact, I'm going to lose the glasses. Already did. Carly and I are going to go into the crowd, and I'm going to teach Carly how to crowd surf.
No.
Oh, that's going to be the goal. I want to be crowd surfing by the end of the night because Griff is an expert at that. And, what could happen?
People think he looks really serious. He's all buttoned down, and the guy's a surfer. He's kind of a renaissance.
He's a regular surfer, almost professional.
A real surfer, not just a crowd surfer.
Absolutely. But, crowd surfing in Times Square, you got to put it on your bucket list. It's quite a lot of fun.
You're putting your life in your own hands.
As long as
buddy.
there's no aliens.
No aliens and no beef going into 2019. We're friends.
Oh,
wait. No, you know what? Forget it. This beef will carry into 2019. I hope the show goes well, my friends. No, seriously.
Love you, Ed.
Great job. Griff, Carly, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And look who got a sneak peek at the Times Square New Year's Eve ball. Our own Spike and some of his canine companions for Independence Friends. They got a tour this week. It was also a great training session for everyone, trying to get all the pups to sit next to one another. That can be tough. That took some time, but they know how to strike a pose. And now a live look at the Spike control room cam where he's getting ready for New Year. See the hat? You can read all about their ball drop adventure on foxnews.com/thedailyspike.
Oh, how good is that?
He looks awesome.
He's ready.
Happy New Year, Spike, as well. He and I certainly don't have a beef. All right. The Boston Marathon bomber taking new legal action, what he's asking for. Plus, honoring a fallen hero. Why the nation pauses to remember this man who served his country so well, Richard Overton.
There's so many people. They come along with a bar out there and see me sitting on the porch. They'll back up and stop and ask me, could they take a picture? Black and white, Spanish, all of them.
Earlier in the program, the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, rather than the Office of Management Budget, or OMB, was the agency that posted that form letter online for furloughed federal workers to use and to figure out how to get their finances together. I did say OPM, the right one, but I think on the banner it might have said OMB, different alphabet. We want to get it right, so there you go. All right, meanwhile, the nation's oldest World War II vet, Richard Overton, has died at 112 years old. He was also believed to be the oldest living man in America. The Army vet was hospitalized with pneumonia but released on Christmas Eve. Sadly, he passed on Thursday evening. Now, in an interview with Fox News in 2014, he talked about his longevity.
Everybody come and ask me, why you live so long? I say, ask God. Don't ask me. I say, if I'd been left with humans to keep me living, I'd been dead a long time.
He talked about God, even into his hundreds. Overton would drive widows in his neighborhood to church. He also liked to talk about how a lot of whiskey and several cigars a day sometimes were what kept him young. So we will miss him and we thank him for his service to our nation. And now, a look at other stories you should know about. It's our Daily Feed. First up, 2018, a worse year than last for our nation's police officers. This is a horrible story. 144 federal, state, and local officers were killed in the line of duty. That's up 12% from the previous year. Second, lawyers for Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev asking a judge to toss their client's death sentence. In an appeal filed yesterday, his legal team argued jurors in the case were allowed to serve despite lying during the selection process. And third, Wells Fargo agreeing to pay $575 million to resolve investigations by all 50 states and Washington, D.C. A federal probe revealed bank employees opened millions of unauthorized accounts under customers' names to meet some quotas. Meanwhile, stocks right now trading higher. A wild week on Wall Street finally winding down, and our own Jerry Willis is live from the New York Stock Exchange. Jerry, we've seen the market gyrating every which way. What's happening today?
Yeah, no kidding, Ed. It's been incredibly volatile. Traders here blame year-end buying and selling by portfolio managers as well as computerized trading for these incredible moves in stocks. Yesterday, the Dow was down at its low about 600 points at about the same time it is right now. But then the Dow staged a rally, closing up some 260 points. The 850-point rebound is the biggest in the Dow's 120-year history. And that wasn't the only record setter. The index set a record for worst ever Christmas Eve sell-off, followed by a record one-day gain of 1,086 points on Wednesday. But today, pretty boring by this week's standards. Stocks moving back and forth over the flat line as traders' attention turned to 2019. Right now, the Dow up 233 points, the S&P 500 up 30, the NASDAQ higher as well. Ed.
Well, boring in this case can be good. Real quick, Sears is facing a hard deadline right now, aren't they?
All right, so the iconic retailer, those shares trading below $1 today as creditors push for the company to liquidate. Potential investors have until 4 p.m. today to tell a bankruptcy court in Westchester that they want to buy the company or parts of it. Now, all eyes on Sears' Eddie Lampert and whether he makes a much-discussed $4.6 billion bid for the retailer. Otherwise, it could be all over for the owner of Kenmore and Die Hard Brands. Back to you guys.
All right, Jerry. Happy New Year. Meanwhile, a Seattle social worker living a frugal lifestyle, or so it seemed, the former banker scrimping and saving while working a variety of side jobs. But Alan Naiman, surprising everyone at his death, he left behind an estate worth $11 million. The good news is he left it all for charities for children. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ed Henry, in for Dana Perino. I will be here with filling in for Martha, 7 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. Meanwhile, Leland Vittert, in for Shep.
President Trump threatening